All right.
Another revival is found here, too.
How do you make a good martini? The bartender that can make a good martini will make it so cold that when you drink it, you will think you are skinny dipping in a Nordic lake with Greta Garbo. The martini was born in San Francisco probably at least 130 years ago. A man called Professor Jerry Thomas, the greatest bartender of his age, claimed to have made the first martini here. Of course, there are about 5 other people that claim to make the martini, too. It's not just gin and vermouth shaken in a tall glass and garnished with an olive. It's a symbolic drink. At a time when deals were done on a handshake, when people didn't have relationships, they had romances or affairs. You know what Dorothy Parker said? I like to have a martini, but only 2 at the most. With 3, I'm under the table. With 4, I'm under my host. A traveler to San Francisco has a great opportunity to go on a martini safari. I come to Bix because it's actually one of the oldest buildings in San Francisco. It was probably here when the first martini was invented.
The important thing about coming to San Francisco and being in San Francisco for the traveler is to make sure to put on your shoes and start walking in any direction and keep your map in your day pack for at least an hour and then find out where you are.
This is the center of North Beach, Bohemia. I once met a French young woman on the street, and I said, "What are you doing in North Beach?" And her English was entirely beatnik English. So she said, I am digging the scene.
Author Herb Gold first came to San Francisco in 1960, where he hung out in coffee houses with Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs.
City Lights is really the first paperback bookshops when that paperback revolution happened in the 50s, and it became a place for poets to meet, and for nearly 40 years now they've been the publishers to the Beats. There's I Am the Lord, Thy God. This is from when it was a church. All the books up here have something to do with the Beat period. There are histories of the beatniks, there are letters, there's a lot of memorabilia, and people come up here and read.
Up above the angels in the unshaken ether and crystal.
People come here to make touch with the literary tradition in the age of word processing and computing. The sign says, "Have a seat, read a book," and that's something of the spirit of City Lights.
Connected at the belly in an unbelievably sweet, lubricious glue.
That's Baudelaire. He was a doomed poet. He smoked opium. They like to think of him as a beat poet of Paris. And that's Bob Kaufman there, the black Jewish poet. The foundations of every Bohemia, and particularly of North Beach, is good, cheap Italian eating.
The cappuccino grande and another cannoli.
This is probably the oldest coffee house in North Beach, the Trieste, and for the beatniks, this was the central coffee house, and it still is.
Great, thank you.
This bar, the Condor, was where the topless was really created. It doesn't do that anymore. Now it's a bar. But this is the place where the topless began. That ended the beatnik period in North Beach because it brought in all the tourists.
Just a few blocks away in the shadow of the Transamerica Pyramid is historic Jackson Square.
This building is called the Lucas Turner and Company Bank Building. It was built in 1853, and actually the construction was supervised by William Tecumseh Sherman, the Civil War general. It was 3 stories tall when it was originally built, and after the earthquake of 1906, the top floor fell off, and so it remains a kind of symbol of the devastation of those years. Right behind me is actually the oldest building in San Francisco. It dates from 1850, just after the gold rush. And you can see that it has iron shutters. That was fire stops. We had a series of fires through the 1850s, and for a while, wooden buildings were outlawed. Then we started having a series of earthquakes, and they decided that maybe brick buildings were not such a good idea. So most of the rest of the city is wood, and these few buildings in Jackson Square that are masonry are among the few that survive on the whole West Coast. After these first few buildings were built, this area became kind of the commercial center of the city, and land became so valuable that they started filling in the bay in order to get more land. And all the fill land that came along was created actually from sunken ships that were abandoned during the gold rush. They basically burned them down to the water and then piled dirt on top of them so they could extend the land, because the land had become very valuable and the ships were worthless because nobody was going home. The earthquake people tell you, oh, it's terrible, you can't have buildings on fill, they'll fall apart. These are the oldest buildings in San Francisco and they're on fill. So much for earthquake theory.
Theory or not, the earthquake and fire of 1906 destroyed most of the city and assured that San Francisco and earthquakes would be linked forever.
I've experienced many quakes. Only one was I really frightened. That was 1989, the pretty big one, we call it. All these red areas are fill land. So these are the areas where the soil's very soft. It turns to jello during an earthquake. And so buildings can actually fall into the fill land. You'll find that the best soils are rock. And rock's usually a hill. So Telegraph Hill, Russian Hill, Nob Hill, Rincon Hill, Twin Peaks area. Those are on bedrock, much safer. About 3 times less shaking goes on when you're on solid rock.
We went through the quake in 1906, and we didn't have another serious quake till 1989. That's a period of almost 83 years in between. So if we hit it in 89, most of us won't be around for the next big one, if it ever happens.
While earthquakes are hard to predict, fog isn't. Visit San Francisco between April and September, and you're almost guaranteed to have fog.
A lot of visitors who come here have no idea what our fog is like. They think of it as this sort of, this sort of misty, vague London fog kind of thing, and they don't expect this huge, thick white cloud that comes and settles over the city and provides a kind of air conditioning. A lot of tourists who come here come ill-informed. They just freeze their butts off in the middle of summertime, because it gets quite brisk here when the fog rolls in.
Fog is a given, and so are San Francisco's famous hills. This is Lombard Street, which bills itself as the crookedest street in the world. The hills also gave birth to San Francisco's unique cable cars, still part of the city's public transportation system. During rush hour, be prepared to share space with commuters. Cables continuously running under the city streets are operated from this building, which is also the home of the Cable Car Museum. The system underwent a major refurbishment in the 1980s, but still operates as it did when it began in 1873.
The cable is about 14 inches below the street surface, and this stick is like a clutch or like a vice grip, and you're always being towed by cable speed, which is about 9 miles an hour, 9.5 miles.